So I'm wetting the paper with a large brush. I'm using hot press paper and I've used framing tape to tape around the edges. I'm using a large round brush to apply the paint. I'm starting off with Daniel Smith's Mayan Blue Genuine and then some Paynes Grey. On top of that blue, wet into wet, I've added a touch more of that Paynes Grey, now slightly thicker. You can see it's a lot darker. And I'm painting that damp into wet just below. So it's kind of like the horizon line here. I'm tilting and I'm going to spritz the sort of blue area there just at the top to allow the paint to flow. As you can see, that grey is really running into the blue there as well. So spritzing and tilting. So I'm tilting here, just allowing that grey to run into the blue, then adding more blue at the top with a tiny touch of Daniel Smith's Wisteria, which is like a pale sort of pink. Any pink will do. Now this is the fun part. I'm using a palette knife to apply the Paynes Grey mixed with some shadow violet, damp into wet. Now this is literally straight from the tube onto the wet paper, using that palette knife to create thin lines as well, adding some more of the Wisteria paint and painting it in damp into damp. Now if you don't have a palette knife, don't worry, you could use a plastic store card for this. I love how the paint catches a wet area and flows down. This is Daniel Smith's Shadow Violet on its own. It's a beautiful colour here. I'm applying it with the palette knife and then a little bit more of the Mayan blue on top. So it's a kind of a seashore with the light sort of in the middle there. Just adding a touch more of the Shadow Violet, a little bit more of the Paynes Grey. And you can see there as I'm tilting and spritzing, all the paint's running down. And I'm not quite sure where I'm going with this, but I kind of like to start with the horizon and then add sort of tube paint onto a wet or damp surface. So I'm kind of sort of thinking, am I going to paint some rocks here? So I'm sort of blending with the palette knife as well. It's almost like painting in oils here. So I'm just sort of blending and sort of just seeing what happens here. So just swirling my palette knife around to create some lovely marks, just seeing what happens. So I'm using the brush again with a little bit of Mayan Blue Genuine with a touch of the Paynes Grey and just adding some blue, sort of almost wet on dry. The areas that are left light is because I've left them unpainted. And I haven't wet that area so you don't lose control and the paint doesn't run into that dry area. Adding some more of the Mayan Blue Genuine here. And I'm just spritzing here and I've given you a lovely close-up to see all those lovely textures that the Shadow Violet creates there. And adding more light by spritzing and mopping here as well. Spritzing here just around the horizon area, allowing some of that dark paint to run off on the side. It creates some lovely light, soft light and an atmospheric feel here to this painting. As you can see there, just spritzing and tilting, taking my time, just seeing where the painting takes me. And as you can see now, I'm adding some sea salt. You can use table salt. I'm just sprinkling it onto the damp surface. You don't want it to be too wet. And of course, if it's too dry, the salt won't work. But it will create some lovely light textures. It will absorb the paint to create those lovely light textures. Spritzing again here to create a soft edge where there's light here, allowing the paint to run off on the side. Again, I'm spritzing the edges to create more light. I'm now spattering. I'm spattering and tilting as well to create some lovely soft textures in the foreground. And I'm going to allow my painting to dry naturally to allow the salt to work. The painting has dried now and I'm just adding some white paint. You can use white gouache, white watercolour or even white acrylic. And it's just to create some sort of light reflections in the water here, the imaginary water. This is straight from my imagination as well. And I'm using a small round brush to apply this wet on dry. And if you notice, the salt has worked really well in both the left and right hand corners to create some wonderful textures. So I'm just continue on adding this white paint right down to the bottom of the painting and a little bit here and there as well to create highlights. This is all wet on dry. And white paint's always really useful because if you've lost your light, you can add this at the end of the painting. So I'm just really sort of adding it carefully here and there. Again, wet on dry, just to kind of compose my picture. I've kept it all so simple. There's not a lot of painting here, but it still can be quite impactful, and using a very limited palette as well. I'm removing the framing tape and it reveals a lovely white border. It does give me time to assess to see if I need to do any more to my painting. I was really pleased with it and I decided not to add any more changes to the painting. So I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial and that it inspires you to paint in this sort of semi-abstract style, using the paint literally straight from the tube, spritzing, tilting, the salt and the spattering technique, and of course using a palette knife to apply the watercolours. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments section. And if you want to get access to my weekly exclusive Patreon tutorials, why not think about joining my Patreon membership? Details about the membership can be found in the description below. Just click Patreon. Thank you so much for watching this tutorial. Happy semi-abstract painting. Bye for now.